Hey everyone. So I thought that would be fun to talk about my predictions for the updates on the banned and restricted card list for Digimon card game. So just 2 days ago, we got this announcement. So banned and restricted cards announcement based on recent tournament data from official events. We will be announcing revisions to banned and restricted cards on December 18th, 2023. This will go into effect on March 1st, 2024. Details will be on the official website and social media. So I thought that this was very interesting. So if you read the wording, usually they say that they have updates to the banned and restricted card list, but in this post, they say that they have revisions to the banned and restricted card list. So just looking at, previous examples of when they had an announcement regarding the banned and restricted card lists, they say things like the official Japanese Twitter account has announced updates to the banned and restricted card list. So they say updates usually. Today, we would like to announce updates to banned and restricted card lists. So in the past, whenever they changed or adjusted the banned and restricted card list, they say that they're just updating it. But in their recent post, they say that they're going to be implementing revisions to the banned and restricted card list. So this could be nothing. This could just be a change of language. They could just be using synonyms. But when I hear the word revision, there are some things that come to mind. So a revision could be a retraction. So something that they decided on, but then they're overturning their decision. So it could be, something like re-limiting a card that they just unlimited, or it could be something that they already have limited that they are going to unlimit again. So it could be a change in cards from the banned and restricted card list, or it could be a change in how they're implementing bans and restrictions. So there could be soft limits. So instead of just like going to 1 for one card or 0 for a card, it could be something like you can only have 2 of these cards, or it could be you can only have 3 of these cards, or kind of like a soft limit in a different way, which I don't think that people have really discussed before. But it could be something like, oh, if your deck contains BT15 Apocalypse, then you can't use more than one of these cards in your deck. So, there are different ways that they could, change the actual structure of the banned and restricted card list. So, it could be just like a synonym. But, these are going to be my predictions based on, me thinking that they're either going to retract something that they either unlimited or they limited, or something that, they just want to revise the whole ban and restricted system. So it's like a systemic change, or it could be a retraction. So let's first go over the cards that are on the list currently. So for the restricted cards, start at 6 Gabumon. The reason is because this, when attacking, draw 1, trash 1, is not once per turn. There's BT13 Geogreymon. The reason is because other decks besides the Marcus Damon decks can really take advantage of this cards when digivolving. So you can play out free tamers. There's this Mach Galgamon. The reason that this is here, I actually forgot, but it said something about being able to turbo or something. Okay, so it says that the conditions are really loose compared to other Mach Galgamons, so that I can easily unsuspend. And pairing this with the other Galgamons, you can really turbo to level 6 faster than expected. So this can really turbo, and it has a really good inheritable is the reason. There's Eismon Skyr mode. So the reason is that you can really easily go through the cards in your deck and then trash cards from your hand. So you can really easily cycle through cards really fast with this card. The card bans that have been lifted are Savior Huckmon from BT6. They say that it really fits in the meta now. It's not too dominating as it was before in BT6. And then Tamihimi, they say that, this is also good for this environment. So they say that these two are not too strong in this format. Other restricted cards are Blossomon. The Digizorption -3 is just really strong. Ipmon, they say that you can really turbo with this card very easily. You can get cards into the trash very easily with this effect. Garurumon, they say that it's because they actually say that this card isn't too bad. They say that it's possibly going to be worse in future game environments, so they want to limit this card now. But based on their wording, it doesn't seem like this card is too broken. So this is one of my predictions for a card that could be unlimited, just because they're like in the end, it doesn't have extreme power in current play environments, but this card limits the future game design possibilities for decks that reference the name Garurumon. So they are explicitly saying that this card is not too overpowered. They just fear that it will be overpowered. So, it's kind of not a strong reason to have it on this list. There's Grand Kuwagamon. They say that it leads to OTKs very easily. Greymon X Antibody, you can turbo very easily into level 5. And then Calling from the Darkness. You can retrieve cards for a low cost from trash. You can delete your own Digimon for a low cost. Sunrise Buster, it has a really strong removal effect, and also you can play out a free tamer. Greymon, because it has that security attack +1, so you can really easily stack them under your X Antibody card, because the X Antibody line of Digimon, the black one, the whole gimmick is just to stack cards under your Digimon, so you can just easily put more and more of these under one Digimon. So the reasoning is because you can just stack a bunch of security attack +1s. Shoutmon Crest 4, because in the Japanese format, this led to really fast games, just because you can turbo through your deck and you can just draw so many cards with this card. Jet Sylphimon, because it kept recovering for low costs, so it can go to level 5 for low cost and then recover. Tamihimi back then, because it just kept stunning things. Mega Digilon Infusion, because when comboed with Susanamon, you can go into Susanamon for cheap, or free even. Reinforcing Memory Boost, because other decks than Yellow use this card. So you can just like splash Yellow into basically any deck, just because this card is really good. Ice Wall, because it limited your opponent from attacking way too... it was too efficient at what it did. It wanted to stall the game, but it was too good at stalling. This is also because of Digizorption, and because it has that inheritable. HPD, because it's really easy to turbo to level 6 with this, level 7 even. This just got unlimited, but because, again, it was too strong in the past format, apparently. Eismon, just because when you had 4 Eismons and 4 Eismon Sky modes, it was pretty easily to cheese these out for free. But now with Eismon Sky mode restricted, it doesn't really make sense to have this restricted still. I think that's just kind of funny. But, I just want to go through the banned and restricted list currently. There are some cards that I think could come off. I will discuss those momentarily. But let's actually talk about Apocalypse, because that is like a huge menace from BT15 onwards. So personally, I'm very excited for Apocalypse. Other people really hate the card. I just love the playstyle of the card, but without digressing too much, let's talk about Apocalypse and the cards that people I have heard say that they want limited. But here's why I think that these cards don't really make sense being limited, and cards I think would make more sense being limited. So Apocalypse, When this card would be played, by placing up to 3 cards with the Dark Master's trait and different names from your battle area or trash under this card, reduce the play cost by 4 for each card placed. So it costs 15, but because you can place up to 3 Dark Masters and different names under it, you can reduce the play cost by 12, so it would just cost 3. End of your turn, once per turn, by placing 1 level 6 or lower Digimon or lower card from your trash as this Digimon's Bomb Digivolution card, activate one of the on-play effects of the card placed by this Digimon's effect. Then for each level 6 card in this Digimon's Digivolution cards, trash the top 2 cards of the opponent's deck. So I've heard several arguments about this. So there are people saying, oh, this card should get an errata, so then you can only use the on-play effects of the Dark Masters, because being able to use the on-play effect of any Digimon is just way too powerful. So that's something that I have heard. Personally, I love being able to use the on-play effect of different Digimon. I don't think that is what makes this card broken. I will discuss later about how I think this deck should be nerfed. But, it doesn't really change too much of the playstyle. It just slows the deck down considerably, but without also killing it. You also can't really restrict a Puck-Kalimon to 1, just because, this is like the main win con of the deck. You want to mill your opponent out. So right away, you want to reduce play costs by 12, so you play this for 3. Already, you place 3 Dark Masters under it. So you have 3 level 6s under it. End of turn effect, you place another level 6 under it. So right away, you can mill 8 cards. So if, milling is the win con of this deck, restricting this card to 1 doesn't make sense. Because if you don't really have the consistency to draw into a Puck-Kalimon, or even then, if you only have the 1 copy and the 1 copy dies, then your win con just doesn't make sense for the deck. So, you really need this card at 4, or, I would argue at least 3, but you definitely need more than 1 or 2, because if you want to focus the win con of the deck on milling your opponent out, then just if you just build your deck and then you only have 1 Puck-Kalimon, then it doesn't really make sense for the win con. So this card should not be restricted, just because if it is restricted to 1, then the whole win con just doesn't make sense. So, I would say that the deck just needs 4 Puck-Kalimons. So this is not the card that should be touched when they're banned or restricting cards. But again, I will go through the cards later. I've heard other people say, oh yeah, you should just restrict the Dark Masters to 1 per deck. So the Dark Masters are Melosedramon, Puppetmon, Machinedramon, Piedmon. And again, I don't really think that makes sense to restrict the Dark Masters to 1. So you kind of really want to play this card by putting 3 Dark Masters under it. So if you are restricting Melosedramon, Puppetmon, Machinedramon, and Piedmon to 1, then instead of having consistency in getting the Dark Masters, you're just really trying hard to find 3 of the 4 1-ofs in your deck. Finding a 1-of is already hard. Finding 3 out of 4 different 1-ofs is significantly harder. So, I don't really think that makes sense to limit these to 1, because you don't really want to digivolve into a Puck-Kalimon. Digivolving is still okay, but, the tempo at which you mill is just more significant. If you can place 3 of these under a Puck-Kalimon, place another level 6 under a Puck-Kalimon end of turn to mill 8. If you were to digivolve this on top of a level 6, and then end of turn you place another level 6 under, you just mill 4. So there is a significant tempo difference. So really, you really want to use this card by placing the Dark Masters under it, and again, limiting the Dark Masters to 1 of each doesn't really make sense because you really want, if you're focusing on mill, then just limiting them to one of each just severely hurts your win con. I have heard people say, oh yeah, maybe we should touch the level 5s, but the level 5s have no significant impact on Dark Masters. You could use one of these level 5s if you want to. They all have the same on-play effect. Reveal top 4 cards of your deck, add 2 level 6 or higher Digimon cards among them to your hand, place the rest at the bottom of the deck. They also have the same end of your turn effect. By delaying one of your Digimon, you may play one Digimon card with the Dark Masters trait from your hand to an empty space in your breeding area without paying the cost. So I would argue that these cards aren't even really that necessary for the Apocalypse deck. Really, you just really want to turbo trash all 4 or like at least 3 of these Dark Master cards to the trash. So Melcydron, Puppetmon, Machinedron, Piedmon. So you really want these cards in the trash. These can help you search for them, but these aren't even really that necessary. If your opponent has something like a Psychmon, it can't reduce play cost, then maybe you would want to play Lady Devimon, Gigadramon, Cherrymon, or Scorpiomon, and then Digivolve into Apocalypse if you have no other alternatives. But really, these are really not significant for the deck. You can just play the deck without these. So limiting or banning these cards will have very little or no impact on Apocalypse decks. Same thing for Vilemon. You don't really need Vilemon. All turns when you're Apocalypse or Digimon with the Dark Masters trait would leave the battle area other than by one of your effects. By deleting this Digimon, prevent it from leaving play. So this is more like a supporting card. This doesn't really affect Apocalypse milling your opponent. Like, it does give Apocalypse some protection, but this isn't really significant to the win con of the deck. So honestly, I think that, if any of these 5 cards down here got hit, it would not really affect Apocalypse at all. If you hit like these 4 cards, it would hurt Apocalypse. It would kill the deck of Apocalypse. So it would slow the deck down, yeah, but it would just make the deck very unplayable if you hit these cards. Same thing for Apocalypse. If you hit Apocalypse, put Apocalypse at 1, then it would just kill the win con of the deck. So if it's just at 1, there's just no point in playing Apocalypse at all. Now, these are some cards that I think would make sense if you hit it, and I will explain these 2 outliers in a moment. But yeah, if you hit Analog Youth, it will slow down Apocalypse considerably, but it will not actually kill the deck, so you can still play Apocalypse. It will just be significantly slowed down. So Analog Youth, on play, reveal the top 3 cards of your deck, add 1 Digimon card among them to your hand, trash your remaining cards. So if you play Analog Youth, for example, you reveal Apocalypse, Melcydron, Puppetmon. Of course, you want Melcydron and Puppetmon in trash, so you would just take the Apocalypse. So Analog Youth is really useful at being able to cycle through the deck, grab whichever cards you need, and then trash whichever level 6s you want into the trash. So this is just really good at turboing your trash, getting cards into it, and then, grabbing your Apocalypse. Searching 3 cards at a time, grabbing Apocalypse if it comes up is just really good tempo. All turns when one of your level 5 or higher Digimon with Digivolution cards is deleted, you may suspend this tamer. If you do, gain 1 memory, then hatch 1 Digi-Egg card to an empty space in your breeding area. So the all turns effect isn't really that necessary, but really the on play will just help you turbo trashing cards into your trash and grabbing a Apocalypse. There's also Garurumon X Antibody. When digivolving, draw 2, then trash 2 cards in your hand. If Garurumon or X Antibody is in this Digimon's Digivolution cards, gain 1 memory. So the draw 2, then trash 2 is just really good, especially even after Eismon Sky mode is now restricted to 1. So now this is the draw 2, trash 2 instead of the draw 3, trash 2. But yeah, this is still very good at turboing cards into your trash, cycling through your deck, finding a Pakalimon earlier. So these two are just really good for the tempo of a Pakalimon. I would say that any of these 5 cards on the top row, restricting them to 1 would just significantly hurt the deck. So, no, I said that wrong. It would just kill the deck outright. Like, if a Pakalimon is at 1, then you just can't rely on the win con at all. Limiting these 4 cards to 1 means that the only way that you're practically going to get to a Pakalimon is if maybe one of them is in trash to reduce play cost by 3, or by 4, I mean. So then you would just play a Pakalimon for 11, which is kind of bad. And then even then, it would just be significantly slowed because you can only mill 4 that turn instead of milling 8. So the problem really is, if you take these away, then a Pakalimon just becomes really unplayable. But if you slow down the potential for milling cards or like getting specific cards into the trash, then I think that a Pakalimon would not be as much of a menace. It would still be playable, but it would be significantly slowed. So then, it's still fair. So people who want to play a Pakalimon still can. It just will not be as fast as it is right now. So Analog Youth just makes sense to be restricted. Garurumon X Antibody also makes sense. This is also used in a bunch of purple decks just because you can really easily get select cards into your trash that way. Now let's actually talk about these weird outliers. So Agumon, RB1004, card number also treated as P009. A deck may not have more than 4 total copies of this in P009. And then Greymon, basically the same thing. So it's treated as P010. A deck may not have more than 4 total copies of this in P010. So going back to the major revisions that they could possibly do for a Pakalimon, to nerf a Pakalimon without really killing the deck, but also slowing it down significantly, would be something like a soft limit. So, for example, if they are limiting Analog Youth, it would hurt a bunch of different decks. So there are different decks like, for example, the Devas from EX5. They really want Analog Youth, so then they can get the Devas into the trash, or something like Imperial Dramon, Dragon Mode Virus, just because, they also want to selectively get cards into the trash. So just limiting Analog Youth would hurt, a bunch of decks. So this is probably one of the reasons why they don't want to limit Analog Youth, because it would slow down a Pakalimon, but it would also slow down and or kill other deck archetypes. This is why, this kind of comes to mind. So this Agumon, there's like this special rule that it is treated as a different card number, and then you can't have more than a combination of 4 of this card and P009. So not exactly the same, but similar enough that I wanted to bring these up for attention. But, if they are revising the ban and restricted card list, so it could mean that they're making like a structural change, or it could be a very significant change that's maybe unprecedented. But I'm thinking maybe they could do something like, if your deck contains BT15, 102 a Pakalimon, you may not have more than 1 copy of Analog Youth EX1 066 in your deck. So they could just have a limit specifically for a Pakalimon. So if they, they want to nerf a Pakalimon, but they don't really want to touch these 5 cards, because touching these 5 cards would just kill the deck. They could instead hinder the deck, specifically by saying, oh yeah, if your deck contains any copy of a Pakalimon, then you're limited to 1 of this card per deck. or maybe even Garurumon X Antibody if they decide not to flat out limit it. They could say if you're running BT15 102 Apocalypse, you can only have one copy of Garurumon X Antibody X5 010 018. So it could be a soft limitation based on that. So it seems weird to say, but sometimes they have done similar things in the past, like with Ultimate Cup. Then if you're playing a black deck and it had to be a black color, so each card had to contain black in it, it could be a legal per deck basis kind of change. So with Apocalypse, if they want to nerf it down, they might limit other cards just for decks that contain Apocalypse. Or they could do something else that's also a soft limit. So this has been brought up before, but we haven't really discussed this in a while. But people in the Digimon community, just like in Yu-Gi-Oh! And other card games, they're like, oh, cool. Yu-Gi-Oh! Instead of just banning a card or limiting it to one, there are soft limits. So, for example, instead of just going to one, they could make something a max of 2. So if they wanted to, they can do, oh, cool, max 2 Melcedramon, max 2 Puppetmon, max 2 Machinedramon, max 2 Piedmon. So, it does hurt the deck, but it doesn't hurt the deck as much as just limiting these cards to 1 apiece. So they could do something like a soft limit. So instead of just outright banning the card or just limiting the card to 1, they could just limit the cards to 2 if they decide not to do like the specific limitations on pieces that accelerate the turbo trashing, like Analog Youth or Garurumon X Antibody. So they could instead just limit cards just to a piece. Now, this is very strange, and I have brought this up to people, but I don't think that they were a fan of what I thought. Okay, I spelled that wrong. So, I have brought this up to people's attention. But, if they are making retractions on the banned and restricted lists, they could also reverse some decisions. So what I am thinking about, we recently just got Savior Huckmon Unlimited again. So it has, the reasoning for that was because being able to churn out Systemons very easily, and also being able to unsuspend this Digimon, especially if Jesmon has security attack +1. So you can attack, unsuspend, attack. So then they said, oh, it's just really good at flooding Systemons out, and also it can lead to OTKs, basically. The reason for Where Garurumon getting restricted was also because this led to OTKs very easily. So if they are going to revise the list even more, I think that Where Garurumon is a good card to come off the list, just because they decided that Savior Huckmon is good now to come off the list, because in this environment the tempo from Savior Huckmon is still good, but it's okay enough in this environment. So if I'm thinking Savior Huckmon, a card that led to really fast tempo and OTK strategies, came off, then they are likely to bring Where Garurumon off, just because these cards basically serve the same function in their decks. So Savior Huckmon is more like an OTK card, so that was why it came onto the list in the first place. And then this is also why Where Garurumon is on the list, just because it led to OTK strategies. But I'm thinking if they're going to take another card off the list, most likely is going to be Where Garurumon promo. There is also Grand Kuwagamon promo that is on the list, which also has an OTK strategy on it. So basically, Digiburst 2, one of your Digimon gets security attack +1. So you can just keep Digibursting on this card, And then with the Grandest Kuwagamon from, I believe, BT9, you can just attack, unsuspend, attack. So then this would also lead to a very easy OTK. I think that this is less likely than the promo Wergurumon to come off, because this leads to a more consistent and fast OTK than the other cards. Wergurumon is also good, but its OTK isn't as consistent. Savior Huckmon also has an OTK option available. Most people choose not to use it. They choose to just flood out Sistermons instead of the OTK strategy. But, I'm just saying that this does have an OTK. It can be used, but just because people don't use it doesn't mean that it's not able to use it. This also has an OTK strategy available, but then this is just very specifically OTK centered. It's just so good at OTKing your opponent. So I think that Savior Huckmon is roughly around the same power level as this promo Wergurumon. So I think that if this is unrestricted, Wergurumon is in a good place to be unrestricted now. I would say that Grandis has the same function in its own deck, but it's just way more consistent at leading up to the OTK. So I can see this being restricted. I can see this continuing being restricted, but if they are just open to OTK strategies now, then I can also see this coming off. But my predictions for what they will do with the banned and restricted card list. So again, revision, I see revision as a retraction to cards that are on the list. So if they are going to take a card off, I would predict Wergurumon promo to come off, or they could overturn their Savior Huckmon decision. So this is the thing that I said online that people don't really agree with. But I'm just saying that if Wergurumon, Grand Kuwagamon are still on the list, then Savior Huckmon more or less does the same thing as promo Wergurumon. Then if this Wergurumon is staying on the list, it makes sense that if they're going to revise something and they want to take something back onto the list, then it would be Savior Huckmon. Just because, these cards serve the same functions, so it doesn't really make sense to me that Wergurumon is still restricted, but Savior Huckmon is not restricted. So I'm just saying that if I had to predict something coming off the list, it would probably be Wergurumon. If they instead want to take something and then put it back onto the list, I would think that it's probably Savior Huckmon. However, if they are going to be implementing big changes, like structural changes, like they're either going to semi-limit things, maybe the Dark Masters are going to be semi-limited, just because, it doesn't really kill a Apocalypse the deck if you semi-limit the Dark Masters, but it does still slow down the deck. But I think that the best thing that they can do is just to make specific limitations on cards like Analog Youth for Apocalypse decks. So if it's like, if you're running Apocalypse at all, you can only play one of these. Or if you're playing Apocalypse, you can only play one of these. And if they decide to do that, I think that it's pretty fair to say that they are going to unlimit other cards like Eismon Scatter Mode, maybe. If they have restrictions like Analog Youth for Apocalypse, you can only play one of, or Analog Youth for Anubismon, you can only play one of. So I can see if they do something similar to that, then they can take Eismon Scatter Mode off, so that other decks can still use it, but their restrictions will only hurt specific decks without taking away the main components of that deck. Meaning, Apocalypse from the Apocalypse deck, the Dark Masters from Apocalypse, or Anubismon from, of course, Anubismon, or Mervamon from Anubismon. But instead of just limiting cards as a general limitation, they could instead limit cards based on the deck that uses the cards. So I think that something like specific limitations for specific cards in specific decks could be a thing, or they could be semi-limiting cards. So instead of just limiting to one, they could limit to two, or if they're making revisions, they could maybe take Wear Garurumon off, or they could maybe take Savior Huckmon back on, or they could, unlimit other cards. Just because if they are going with the specific nerfing strategy for a Puckalymon, for example, then they might feel better taking off the Gabumons from the list, or they might feel better taking off Eismon Sky Mode from the list. And then this is just my opinion, but it's just really strange how Eismon, the OG Eismon, is still here. So using BT7 Eismon and BT7 Eismon Sky Mode in tandem makes it easier than anticipated to cycle through your deck while playing Digimon to your battle area for free. Therefore, we've decided to restrict this card to one copy per deck. So this card makes sense at the time that they would restrict this card, because this card is more like a support card for Eismon Sky Mode. They didn't really want to restrict Eismon Sky Mode because it was so good in purple decks. And then if you ran Eismon Sky Mode at 1 and you ran this at 4, it doesn't really make too much sense. So then back then they restricted this to 1. So you can still run Eismon Sky Mode, and then you can still run this, but just not be able to cheese out level 4 Digimons easily. But now with the Eismon Sky Mode restricted, it just doesn't really make sense that the Eismon is still restricted. It doesn't. It has long been an effective card in decks that utilize trashing, but its ability to exchange a very large number of cards at level 4 has greatly reduced the usage rate of other cards with hand exchange effects. So now that this card is restricted to 1, it doesn't really make sense how Eismon is still at 1. If anything, when Eismon Sky Mode was restricted, they should have put Eismon back to 4. I'm not saying that 4 Eismon is viable if you only have one Eismon Sky Mode, but it's just weird to me how this is still at 1. It doesn't change much if you change this to 4, but I'm just the reason that this is on the list is because Eismon was at 4. I mean, Sky Mode was at 4. But now with Sky Mode at 1, it's just strange seeing this at 1 still. So I don't think that they will probably remove it from the list, because there's very little difference in playing that at all now, because Eismon Sky Mode is just at 1. So I'd sooner expect Wear Garurumon promo to come off the list. But if they, want to take this off the list, I can definitely see that happening. If they kept Eismon Sky Mode at 1, if they wanted to eventually reverse that decision and then put Eismon Sky Mode back to 4, then I can still see this remaining at 1. But it's just strange to see it still at 1. But yeah, those are my predictions. I don't think that they will restrict these cards to 1, just because restricting them to 1 will just kill the win con of the deck. The level 5s don't really do anything for the deck, really, so you don't really need the level 5s. The same thing for Valmon, they don't really accelerate the win con of the deck too much. So I'm saying they're still good for the deck, but if you limit them, then it doesn't really hurt the deck to a pace that is considerable enough to require nerfing in the first place. Analog Youth, Garurumon X Antibody, I think that if anything, they might probably limit them based on if you're playing a Puckalymon or not. Otherwise, they might be restricted, but if they are restricted generally, then it would hurt so many other decks. Garurumon X Antibody, Analog Youth, I think that if they were to restrict them, the best thing to do would just be to restrict them to specific decks. Otherwise, just flat out restricting them generally will hurt so many decks. And if they were to take something back on, guess Savior Huckmon just because Where Garurumon is still on the list. But if they were to take something off, I would guess Where Garurumon because Savior Huckmon came off, and it's basically the same reason why these two were restricted. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. Either a semi-limit, a specific limit, or even some retractions based on the cards that they took off or put on the list. But yeah, this was a fun video to make, and these are my predictions for the ban list. I forgot to mention, I did very briefly mention this, but they could also restrict Mervamon just because it is very good with Anubismon. I believe that's this one. So this Anubismon can cheese out your purple Digimon for low cost. So Mervamon can be cheesed out for low cost, and the Mervamon will then play out more Digimon. So it can cheese out 3 different Digimon for very low cost. So they might limit Mervamon. They might limit Ignitemon. So they could limit these 2 cards, because if they basically Anubismon is the counter to Apocalypse right now. It goes toe to toe with Apocalypse. So if you hurt Apocalypse, it just makes sense that if they nerf Apocalypse, they would also nerf Anubismon. So they might touch those cards for Anubismon, but otherwise I would expect that they would probably implement restrictions to Analog Youth or Garurumon X Antibody specifically. So again, they might just do like a general restriction for these cards. But the best thing that they should do, in my opinion, is just to restrict these cards according to what cards are in the deck. So if you're playing Apocalypse, just limit these to 1. So then that way, Apocalypse won't be hurt too bad to the point that's unplayable, but it will be significantly slowed down. So then, it doesn't have too much tempo. But yeah, restricting any of these 5 cards will just hurt the deck so much that's basically unplayable at that point. But yeah, thanks for watching. And yeah, let's check out what the bans are on the 18th together. So that's going to be a really fun time. But yeah, see you later.